heard the voice from over there. I heard around. How did they feel this morning? You could tell it bothered him because his little face, you know, isn't rough. Really hurt. I really didn't. Well, I mean, I'm sure it does hurt, but I thought. Yeah. It was exactly. They'll probably call. Got it.
Great. So shall we kick off? We're a couple of minutes in. So first of all, welcome everyone. As I've seen Ben just posted in the chat, welcome for everyone joining from around the world. We've got some people joining from Australia at a horrible time, so really appreciate it. It's great to see so many people. Just a couple of like health warnings. Can you remember to mute just because there's quite a lot of people on the call, and also to we're going to have a Q&A session at the end. So if you have questions or you think of questions, please post them in the chat, and we'll make sure we've got time at the end to cover them. We may be able to take a few mid-flight, but it's a little bit difficult with so many people to have a full open Zoom chat. Today we're going to kind of dive into one of the more specific topics of the Energy Tag initiative working, and the idea for the webinar was organized by M-RETS. We have, which is one of the leading tracking systems in the US, and we have Ben and Rosie here. The agenda. This is the agenda for today. So I'm going to I think we've got a few new faces. So I'm going to kind of give a very brief kind of recap to the Energy Tag initiative and granular certificates to kick us off, and give an update on the work that we're doing and some of the upcoming events. I'm very pleased to say we've got Katrine Verwimp here, who is representing the AIB, and she's going to talk about the challenges of moving to higher temporal granularity in the context of guarantees of origin in Europe. And then we'll be handing over to Ben and Rosie, who'll lead on, give an intro to M-RETS, but also to take us through their proposal for dealing with one of the most kind of potentially challenging issues of implementing a system of granular certificates, which is how to deal with fractional RECs. When we'll come to what that means in a moment. So first of all, what is Energy Tag? I think many of you are probably familiar and may have seen our white paper, but Energy Tag is an independent, non-profit, industry-led initiative to define and build a market for granular energy certificates. And just to recap, the reason why we think this is important. First of all, in the context of climate change, the electricity system is probably the biggest tool, most important tool that we have for decarbonization. If we can decarbonize the power sector and electrify everything, you can tackle over 70% of global carbon emissions. And it's kind of now almost becoming an accepted strategy and methodology. And that's why we're seeing growing demand around the world from all lots of different industrial sectors, from governments and from individual consumers to purchase renewable electricity or carbon-free energy. And over 25 years ago, the first energy attribute certificates or RECs in the US or guarantees of origin in Europe were developed as a robust certificate and accounting mechanism to enable consumers to choose one form of electricity over another. And through having a centralized registry and a number of protections in place, these energy attribute certificate systems enable consumers to make reliable claims about where their energy is coming from, and to use those in things like Scope 2 carbon emissions reporting. Now, the great news is over the last 25 years, the cost of renewable energy has fallen dramatically to the point where renewable energy is cheaper on a levelized cost of energy basis than fossil fuels. So actually now simply buying renewable energy, carbon-free energy, shouldn't add any cost to consumers. However, the next phase, which is buying carbon-free energy around the clock on a 24/7 basis, that's the next big challenge, because of the variability of wind and solar. Buying those electricity sources in certain hours is not difficult, but to get round the clock carbon-free power is a real challenge. And that's why we see a need for moving to higher temporal granularity, and the Energy Tag initiative, which is to add a timestamp to existing certificate schemes, and then to support the development of a market for those certificates. And the reason why we think there are benefits of doing that are, firstly, we think you can improve trust around renewable energy claims by linking production to consumption in real time. You can increase access for all organizations to join this movement towards 24/7 carbon-free energy. You can use these certificates to generate a price signal, a market mechanism. That means batteries and storage and other forms of new energy technologies can generate extra revenues by providing carbon-free energy at times of scarcity. And it's also paving a way for new forms of carbon accounting using hourly carbon data. And so the initiative itself, it's this industry-led nonprofit. We have 3 main activities. We're setting some guidelines to support the development of a market for time-stamped energy certificates. We are coordinating a series of demonstrator projects around the world, which have been announced and are detailed in the white paper that we published in May. We have several more coming online soon as well. And we're trying to raise the awareness about this issue and the importance of temporal granularity. Just for people to be aware, we've got quite a lot of activities coming up after the summer. Today, this is the webinar that we're doing. We have we have 4 different working groups covering the guidelines for issuance and cancellation, the life cycle of timestamp certificates. That's kind of a key topic for today. There's working group 2 covering the use cases for these certificates. Working group 3 on the demonstrator projects, and another work stream on kind of policy. If you would like to participate in any of these, please just sign up via the website, and then you'll get if you're not already, and we can send you a sign up form for these individual working groups. We've got a few conferences coming up, including one organized by the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency in the US next week, and a couple of European conferences as well. Just so you know, the work of working group 1 is ongoing. We published our white paper. We're now planning to publish a second white paper in Q1 next year. And there's a kind of a core drafting subgroup which is working on some text, and that text is being shared regularly with wider members of working group 1 for comment and feedback. And the goal is to develop a set of credible guidelines rather than a strict kind of mandate, but it should be sufficient to support a voluntary but also real market for granular certificates. Yeah, we do want as much participation in this as possible. So, please get in touch with us if you'd like to participate. This is the timeline that we're working towards the publication of our the next white paper, which will be ended towards the end of Q1. And just to give you a kind of a taste of the issues that we need to tackle with in order to set out some guidelines that can support a robust, trusted market that works in a way that's compatible with the existing traditional REC schemes. These are just some of the issues that we need to cover. And the topic we're covering today on fractional RECs is definitely a key one. But there's a whole host of other issues like time zones, linkages between traditional systems and the current systems, the period of validity, market design, fraud detection, prevention. So there's a whole range of different topics which are being covered, and we're always welcoming for new people who want to help participate in the development of these guidelines. And then this is just a slide from a working group 1 session we had recently, diving into the linkage between existing traditional EAC systems. And we've been very clear since the beginning of this this initiative that we have to work absolutely with the existing traditional certificate systems to make sure that there's no double counting, and in a way that doesn't in any way kind of disparage or cast aspersions on traditional certificates. We're very clear that this is traditional certificates provide a very important mechanism in the energy system, and this is just a way for a natural kind of evolution, and a way for people who have already kind of decided they want to go down a 24/7 route, people like Google, now Microsoft, and others, to allow them to make claims about their energy consumption on an hourly basis. And I'm pleased to see, say, Katrine and Ben are going to go into that in more detail. So I'm going to stop there. Please, if you haven't already, sign up at the website. If there's anyone else you think who would be interested, please let them know. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand over to Katrine.
Thank you, Toby and Katrine. All right, looks like you're ready to go.
Hello, just checking whether you see my PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, we do.
Great.
We see it.
So thanks a lot for inviting me here in this webinar. And indeed, hooking on to what Toby mentioned, existing systems, they are of course substantial here to consider. So thank you for the honor of talking about guarantees of origin in Europe. And so I'll mention a little bit of the building blocks of the existing system in the European energy certificate system, and mention some challenges of moving towards higher temporal granularity. So the existing GO system, guarantees of origin system, I think you all know, this is a book and claim system. Physical electrons cannot be tracked over the copper wire, but a documentation system can do so. Guarantees of origin are electronic documents that enable to do claims on the origin of energy, merely electricity to start with. That kicked off 2 decades ago, but also now for the other energy carriers. And for electricity, this has further developed and extended to other energy carriers, gas, hydrogen, heating and cooling in the Renewable Energy Directive. But it is also complemented, for electricity at least, to disclosure, which means the obligation of electricity suppliers to inform the customers of their electricity, of the origin of the electricity they're supplied with. And in Europe, there is the obligation that this should be backed with cancelled guarantees of origin. You'll note that I use the word cancellation where it may be that Ben uses, or Rosie uses retirement. AIB, the Association of Issuing Bodies, is a non-profit association founded almost 2 decades ago. Now we have 27 countries connected. Our members are issuing bodies, 31 members. They come from the European Union, the European Free Trade Association, and the Energy Community. And they can be very diverse in their nature. We have regulators, market operators, transmission system operators, ministries, power exchanges, etc. Currently, all our members are by their governments assigned as issuing bodies for the official electricity GOs. And about half of our members are also assigned by their governments as competent bodies for supervising electricity disclosure of suppliers. 7 of our members are today already assigned by their governments for issuing gas guarantees of origin, and several more are in the process of becoming appointed. While we also have place and we have an observer for issuing bodies of non-governmental certificate systems. So that is all governed in our EECS standard, the European Energy Certificate System, that was jointly developed by the issuing bodies and that is maintained by AIB and its issuing bodies. And what are the pillars of our energy certificate system in Europe? It's first of all our EECS rules. It's a rule book that we developed together after many years of talking and agreeing and voting and fine-tuning. This is about engaging into quality and harmonization, which facilitates a European market that interconnects cross-border the national geosystems that are regulated in national law. We also have another pillar that is our IT hub that enables the electronic transfer of guarantees of origin between national domains, between the registries of the domains. And another pillar is our quality assurance, the peer reviews and audits of the national domain geosystems compared to the EECS rules, so that all other issuing bodies are ensured of the quality of the geos that they import and that they adhere to EECS. What is the size of the market we currently operate? Well, in 2020, there were almost 800 million guarantees of origin issued. A guarantee of origin has a size of 1 megawatt hour. Several of them stayed domestically in their same country, but cross-border, there were also 628 million guarantees of origin transferred across the borders in Europe, facilitated by AIB. So the framework under which we operate is today, it starts with the legislation, the Renewable Energy Directive, that states the purpose of guarantees of origin, and a little bit a basic framework in a one-pager, Article 19. GOs are for disclosure. And then in the directive, there is reference to a standard that already is becoming mandatory now, the EN 16325 standard. That standard is currently under fine-tuning, under revision. Its aim is to foresee in a reliable guarantee of origin system. And then around that, we still have our EECS system, although it existed already before the SENS standard. And the SENS standard is based on the EECS standard, but it goes beyond the SENS standard. It not only facilitates reliable geos, but also enhances efficiency, because that is also very important. If you want a liquid market to be created and to be operated, then it needs to work efficiently. Otherwise, overhead costs will undermine the liquidity of the market. Some components to be managed in a reliable geosystem, they're all relevant aspects, each to be governed separately and integrated with each other. So if we look at upgrades to the guarantee of origin system, it's also relevant to consider which of these components are affected. We have account holder registration processes, we have production device registration, geo issuing, geo transfer, geo cancellation. The end of life of a geo is always very important, and disclosure, how the claim is brought forward to a customer. So this is all under the authority of a competent body that takes responsibility of this. Also maybe relevant to look at for a second is what does a guarantee of origin look like under EECS? It's not a paper with golden letters, it's an electronic document identified by a unique identification number and a number of data fields that relates to that unique ID. These number of data fields, they inform about the attributes that relate to the production device, and some meta information that relate with that quantity of produced energy. So the energy medium is one of these data fields: electricity, gas, hydrogen. The product type, the production periods, currently these are defined by start and end dates in EECS. So this, if moving to granular, that would have to be complemented with more temporal information. The energy source is mentioned, and a lot of information about the production device, its technology, its location, its capacity, etc. Its date of commissioning, the type of support granted for the amount of energy produced and for the investment of the production device, some labels that may be attached to it, etc. In addition, we have extended the EECS rules with that had already a scheme for electricity geos with a scheme for gas geos, and in that scheme there is a lot of additional data fields that are further being fine-tuned with the issuing bodies, but they inform about the type of gas, etc. An update of the data field structure is subject to a vote by the AIB members. And why is that so relevant? Well, that makes, of course, the difference between, it's quickly saying some update of the system would be logic. Let's add a data field. We have to agree with all the issuing bodies, all 31 members today, that we move forward. It's not, it shouldn't be unanimous vote necessarily, but weight majority vote. So that brings us to list a little bit of challenges and opportunities that we see in Europe in relation with if we would move to granular, what is at least in the attention. European legislation fixes the size of guarantees of origin to 1 megawatt-hour. In case of issuing temporal certificates for small devices, it will take a while before they reach 1 megawatt-hour. For some, it's already a challenge to do it in 1 month, of course. So one consideration could be, should the size of the energy unit for which the certificates stand, could it be lower or not? So there is a data field phase value on the certificate that could be reintroduced and considered. The production periods in EECS today, they are determined by their start and end date. So an evolution could be to add start time and time of a production period. The fact in itself that EECS has been a success could also be a little bit of delay in moving forward in this respect, because to be facilitating the substantial volumes that we do in terms of geo transfers and geo issuing at national levels, IT investments have been accordingly. So if integrating new upgrades into national IT systems and cross-border systems, then this needs to integrate into a multiple-year work plan. And then the concept of disclosure supervision, which is an asset to have, it ensures reliability. Today it focuses in Europe at double claims and ensuring reliable claims. And there are in every country supervisory authorities that's arranged by law. But if consumption matching would move to time-based matching, this might also involve the attention of the national supervisory competent body for disclosure. Also in this big exercise of avoiding double counting, it will be relevant to involve the parties that are looking at some aspect of disclosure supervision already, and that relates with consumption. And some elements that I would bring into the developments or the upgrades or the improvements that are being made that are relevant to remember for further architecture development. They come mainly from what we learned from from facilitating cross-registry transfers. Cross-registry transfers, they benefit a lot, a big lot, from harmonized rules and a harmonized data format. Be clear enough in your rules, be clear that they are not multi-interpretable, because that could install doubt here and there. Have a harmonized data format enhances practical, smooth operation. Unique identification per certificates enables backtracking. When doing cross-registry transfer, it easily can happen that something goes wrong, certificates start to live in 2 registries, could happen, but when you're able to identify a single certificate, you can prevent double counting and handle the errors if you would have made such. The immutability principle also here seems probably self-evident, but once you move the certificate to another registry or even to another account, you cannot change the content of it anymore. And transparent coverage of liability of all parties involved has always been a very clean way to make sure that there are no disproportional expectations and that everybody can take its responsibility. A fixed certificate size in itself as a concept enables a liquid market. It's easier for market parties to speak about quantities of certificates that they transfer if these certificates have a fixed unit of energy that they represent. And in general, there have often been debates on how information on geos should be used, which geos can be used for what. It has not always been possible to conclude and to come to a harmonized rule regarding which geos can be used for what. In the different countries, there are different policies in place, but providing transparent information on these geos has usually been the way to overcome it. This way, the consumers and or policymakers are enabled to make the choices that they want. So in short, upgrading a system, if you want to move fast, go alone, moving far, go together is often a saying from Africa. It does make sense, absolutely. I think also for EECS, it's very relevant to look at the demonstrators. It's very relevant to look at the various scenarios, like how either an evolution of the current geo system, being it fine-tuned to temporal, and you also see the demonstrators that do a parallel system that try to build on top and together with issuing bodies, but in a parallel registry. As long as this is done together, this can make sure that it doesn't undermine trust, then we see that it's developing and that movement is ongoing. So happy to engage into any further upgrading and learnings with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katarina. I really appreciate that. And while Rosie's pulling the M-RETS slides up, I'm Ben Gerber from M-RETS. I just wanted to thank Energy Tag, AIB. Also, we have a lot of M-RETS subscribers and a few board members on. And I think an important question is that we want to emphasize is we've included hourly data in the M-RETS system since 2019, but we realize that this doesn't need to be a race. And that one of the reasons we want to host a series of these webinars and include an international voice is that it needs to be done in an intentional manner. And one of the things that we've explored and emphasized a lot, and I hope people get sick of me saying this, is that the technology piece of in the sophistication in that is dwarfed by the market complications. And that's why we're having these, is that it could be that a group like Energy Tag or AIB or M-RETS just goes and does this, but if we don't get the market piece right, then it will be a failure. And so there's also global consequences. And I think it's important to note that M-RETS, which started as a regional organization, but now tracks across North America. If everybody does this, whether it's in North America, the different system in North America, or in Europe differently, then it's going to be very hard for a consistent accounting mechanism. And as we know, not just for multinationals, but even if homeowners in one part of the country are claiming one thing and another are claiming another based on different strategies and data usage, it doesn't really create a consistent market, and the claims have a lot less meaning and validity. So I think it's, again, emphasizing the importance of the decisions that we make now and over the course of the next year are really critical. And Rosie's going to jump into, she's really the technical expert on the M-RETS team. I'm super lucky to have her. I also want to emphasize that we don't always agree on everything. And so, and in Energy Tag, if you love having robust discussions, it's a great place. Because even on my team, we don't agree. And then even within other organizations and within countries. So we want to emphasize that it's okay to be respectfully critical of the ideas presented here. And we want to engage in that dialogue and hope to get into that in the questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Rosie.
Excellent. Thanks, Ben, and great to be here. Yes, my name is Rosie Hoy. I'm the technical program manager at M-RETS. I've been with the organization almost 4 years now, and have been thinking about hourly data for a good chunk of that. M-RETS did their initial stab at integrating hourly data into our tracking system back in, well, we started working on it in late 2018 and started collecting hourly data and saving it in the system in early 2019. So we've had a long time to think about a lot of these aspects. And we have a team of software developers that is deeply thinking about all the technical details, while folks like Ben and all of you are probably thinking about more the market and the policy implications. But these are all important. And what we're hoping to talk about today are some of our assumptions and our approach to the full life cycle of certificates. We have a very particular perspective as being the owner and administrator of a tracking system. So for us, we of course are concerned with how these all the complexities that come along with hourly data will fit into our existing work as a tracking system, our long-standing mission to track environmental commodities in North America. So yes, we have a lot to cover today. I won't get too deep into a lot of technical details, but we would love to engage with interested parties after this session to really get into the weeds, because the weeds are very important, and we really want to sanity check a lot of the approaches that we've taken that I'll kind of take a high level look at in this presentation. And unfortunately, outside the scope of our discussion today, I really won't have time to talk about carbon claims or a lot of the market implications, which are very important. But the focus of my presentation today is very much so on the life cycle of certificates and how we're hoping to integrate that into our existing system. All right. So first off, a bit about our philosophy and what drove our approach. As I mentioned, we started tracking this in 2019 and have taken a very incremental approach with the end game in mind of obviously being able to support granular transactions in a robust hourly market. It is our job, our primary role in this industry, also to preserve data integrity across hourly transactions, something that we take very seriously and something that has its complications when just dealing with whole megawatt hours. But once you start breaking them up into hours, it's a whole other level of complexity. And because we are trying to integrate all of this into one system, we are thinking about how we can clearly communicate the nature of certificates to users. If they are, as we're calling them, standard certificates with just a monthly vintage, or if they are true hourly certificates that have attached hourly data and may have been split up in various ways through transactions. How these are understood in our system is very important. And as the designated tracking system for several compliance programs in North America, it was really important to us that we think about how we're preserving existing markets, programs, and other systems that already integrate into our tracking system. We wanted to do this in such a way that it wasn't totally disruptive, but also really flexible. And we know users want to be able to cherry pick hours and to do really dynamic things. So these are a lot of kind of competing interests that we had to think about. And we hope that the approach that we're taking will make sense today. So the first important thing that we really want to present to this group is the idea of a fractional issuance. We have thought about this for several years, and at first didn't think this was something that what made sense to do, but have come around to realize that for true data integrity, there's no way to get around it. You have to start breaking RECs up into fractionals. So RECs, as they're traded, will not always be whole numbers. A REC will still equal 1 megawatt hour. That's not going to change. And we don't think this changes the definition of a REC, but just how they get transacted on will no longer be in whole numbers. That's our proposal anyway. And how we're going to structure this in our system is through an opt-in feature. So for the folks who don't care about hourly data and want to continue on in their activities as they did before, they don't even have to think about this. They won't see it. Their experience will stay the same. But for folks who do care about hourly data, on the level of the generator, we'll provide an opt-in feature where once they've opted in, we will issue certificates in non-whole quantities. And this will enable everything that follows and give us the data integrity that we need moving forward. If we continued doing what we do, and I think what most tracking systems do, and round. So if say a generator submits 100.2 megawatt hours, we take that 0.2 and we roll it over to the next month. So in our current world, that hasn't been a big issue, but when we're talking about fractional, or when we're talking about hourly certificates, and we really need to maintain this concept of data integrity where the parts will always add up to the whole. If you're rounding and sending that 0.2 megawatts to the next vintage, nothing's going to add up. And we saw this as being a huge issue for the market, something that would continue to kind of multiply and result in potentially a lot of data integrity issues. So that's a little bit more context into why we felt like moving to fractional issuances was really important. And one of the important kind of details that comes up when you do this is there will be a point where generators go from issuing whole numbers to issuing fractions, and you will likely end up with this fractional remainder that was from the previous issuance, but can't be incorporated into the first fractional issuance. So this fractional remainder in our proposal would get issued as almost an extension of the last vintage that was issued. It would also be a fraction, but it would not have an hourly profile and just essentially exist in the system as part of the previous vintage. Oh, there we go. All right. And another important concept that we wanted to share today is this idea of a generation profile. So the generation profile is essentially a proportional representation of all the hourly data that was submit for a given period. Usually in our system, that means a month. And it's calculated from the original generation data and gets stored on the level of the certificate. The technical details aren't terribly important, but we're thinking of it as part of the immutable attributes associated with a certificate. So this is something that will live with a certificate forever. It will always be accessible to anybody who's interested in what the original generation profile of a vintage or a batch of certificates look like, even after they undergo an hourly transaction. This is something that will still be available, and it will aid in the calculation of the hourly matrix when we start going through subsequent, what we're calling standard simple split transactions before certificates have been converted to hourly. So I put just a very simple example here of how the hourly or the generation profile would work in what we're calling just a standard transaction, where, say, in this case, half of an issued quantity were split off, and how you would calculate the hourly matrix based on this generation profile. So again, very simple math, but it's demonstrating an important assumption that we're making about standard certificates, or the assumption that we're making is that this generation profile is constant across the splitting of standard certificates. So please, if that concept isn't clear, definitely ask questions about it, because it's a really important starting point of our approach. And again, to be able to support kind of these two different worlds, the world of standard certificates that have monthly vintages and this world of hourly certificates, we're going to be implementing a conversion process in the system. So this will be totally optional. Just because a generator has opted into to issue in fractionals, those certificates will exist in our system as standard certificates until the point they're converted. So there's no obligation for those certificates to be part of an hourly claim or part of a matching scheme, even if they've been issued in this way. We're trying to keep it as flexible as possible and give users and generator owners and certificate purchasers the option at every point until they're converted to think about, well, do I want to use these for this type of claim or this type of claim? So the conversion process will be triggered by the first hourly transaction in which specific hours are split from a batch. And this process converts a standard or monthly vintage to a true hourly certificate. This will be a very important point in the life cycle of certificates, where once this occurs, it can't go back. So there's a lot of flexibility until this conversion process, but after essentially that generation profile has been altered for a specific quantity of certificates, then it must always be understood as an hourly batch of certificates. So from that point going forward, all transactions must be hourly. See here, did I jump over? Yes. So, and this means that, so for every transaction that occurs, the hours must be taken into account. And for any retirement that would follow, the hours must be taken into account. It is our proposal right now anyway that for the time being, certificates could not be hourly certificates that have been essentially had hours cherry picked out of them should not be eligible for an annual claim, because some of the assumptions, our perceived assumptions about certificates have been violated. So, but this is something that we would love to engage with other folks on if they think about it the same way, or if we're kind of applying artificial constraints. This is something that we've struggled on a lot, and as Ben has pointed out, we don't always agree on our team, but as he says, I won this one. So that's
this is one where even though I'm the CEO, I had to defer to Rosie and say she's right. And but as you can see in the chat, feel free to disagree. And yeah, it's
and we don't, it's not probably not a matter of right or wrong, but it's like how conservative we are in our approach. And because this is new, we decided to take a more conservative approach. But again, this is a really important issue we hope to engage with all of you on. And it has really important market implications. And a lot of my perspective comes from concerns about how this will affect carbon in the future. So although this is a technical detail, seemingly technical detail, it does have really big implications for how this market functions in the future, and the impact in the future as well. So we threw out a couple little discussion scenarios that we hope demonstrate important aspects of our approach. So in our first here, let's hypothetically pretend we have a user who retires a batch of certificates and only retires select hours. So these certificates have been converted to hourly certificates. And then that party decides to sell these certificates to another party outside of their organization because we assume they don't need them. Does this transaction do they need to select hours in this transaction? Essentially, are the hours in play in just this simple transfer? And in the methodology that we're proposing, that yes, the answer to that question is yes, they would have to take the hours into account in that transfer. But again, we would love to discuss if people think this makes sense or not. And the next scenario here, just hopefully this again helps us spur some discussion. Say organization A has 100 certificates. They retire only the certificates from the hours of 1 to 5 p.m. on Monday through Friday as part of an hourly claim. So again, hours have been cherry picked. They've been converted to hourly certificates. And then similar scenario, they sell the rest of those certificates to another organization. Can that organization make a retirement resulting in an annual claim with those essentially leftover hours from Organization A's retirement? Based on the methodology we're proposing, the answer to this would be no, that this should not be allowed. But again, we would love to discuss if people think this makes sense or not. So that's the conclusion of our presentation. We covered quite a bit, and we hope that you have lots of questions, and there very likely will not be time to cover them all today, but definitely reach out to us, and we hope to really get into the weeds. Thanks. Yeah,
thanks, Rosie. I really appreciate that. And we have a lot of questions. We tried to answer some. I made a promise because I always hate when you're on a webinar and there's a lot of questions and you don't answer them. So I will commit to at least answering them and then maybe sending around an email to the other presenters to get their input. So I've been tracking them on a sheet, but I'm going to go back in order just to be fair. And someone asked this question: what's the difference between a granular certificate and real-time rec retirement? Is there any link? And I'm not sure, just before we get to the answer, there's a real hot debate in this about real time. I don't like using that term because a lot of people think real time means you're actually matching renewables to generation at the moment they happen, even though our energy system will require at least some backwards look. So that I'm going to insert my point there. But if any of the speakers disagree with that, and if they could get to what is the difference, that would be great.
No, we've had this debate. Yeah, definitely agree. Real time is not the best word phrase for it. What we're talking about is certificates with a timestamp, and the way in which those will be traded will be similar to how certificates are traded today, where there are forward transactions for certificates, where people buy the rights to certificates before they've been generated and issued. And then there's some period ex post for claims. What we hope is that there is a development of a forward market, an ex ante market, so that people use forecasts of generation and consumption to optimize, and then to use storage and demand response and other forms of flexibility to optimize. So we do want there to be some forward market, but it's not like everything is happening in real time or needs to happen in real time. There's a lot of forward planning and matching that happens after the event. That makes sense. I'm not quite sure what the question was getting at with it. A GC, a granular certificate, is defined as, in the white paper, a energy certificate with a timestamp. So an hourly rec would be pretty similar to a GC, I think.
Great. So there's another question about the loss of renewable or carbon-free energy as a result of charging or discharging a battery. So that is a very, it's an important question. It gets actually to the heart of some of the things Energy Tag is looking at. Is someone willing to answer that in 30? Because it's a very divisive question.
Yeah.
But
I think Katrine would be good because it's actually an issue that's already been dealt with for pump storage and the geo system. Katrine was involved with. Do you want to say a few words?
Currently, in the European geosystem, storage in itself is actually not included. In general, in most countries, it's not included in the issuance and cancellation process because storage is not seen as production and usage of energy. So in a non-matching or non-temporal issuance concept, actually the system mainly foresees that GEOs are not cancelled for input to storage and not issued for output to storage, but storage operators can cancel GEOs for the storage losses. Except there is one acceptance in Austria, where there is a system where GEOs that relate to pumped storage are also stored together with the energy, and while energy is flowing out of a pumped storage system, then GEOs are released accordingly again, and also FIFO system, a FIFO principle, first in, first out. So it's yeah, just on that field. But if you want to do storage in an hourly system and you want to be correct in time stamping and creating a business case for storage operators, it needs additional development, I think.
Thank you. So, Rosie, a question to direct at you. Is the main aim of fractional RECs, and obviously the other presenters can chime in, to include the consumer household market or simply increase industrial usage?
Both. We've discussed going out to 6 decimal places, basically out to a watt, to really be able to support the participation in this market of a lot of small generators that could be household level type generators. But yeah, this of course I think will include all the big players as well. I guess if that's getting at the nature of the question, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Toby, does Energy Tag have a thought?
Well, I think I'm not sure if this is in the question. Like for me, like fractional RECs is an important facilitator of moving to hourly RECs, right? Timestamp RECs, because if you want to quantify the energy that was produced in a given hour rather than in a given month or a given year, then you're going to be dealing with, even if it's quite a large generator, you may well have to deal with units less than a megawatt hour. So it is important. It's hard to see a system of hourly RECs without having a method for dealing with fractional RECs, and there are big reasons why you want, and there are lots of big corporates and governments now that have expressed an interest in hourly RECs and granular certificates, if that makes sense. But yeah, we definitely want to include residential assets, small distributed energy resources. So yeah, it definitely captures that.
So another question came in, this one's out of order, but I think it really gets at the very heart of this discussion, which is, why can't you make an annual claim? Someone wrote, I don't understand why you can't. Could you clarify that? And maybe like Rosie, Toby, and Katarine, maybe to explain that question.
Who goes?
Should I go first?
Yeah.
This is my perspective. It seems that where this is all going is people are doing this because they care about carbon. And eventually that we're not quite there yet with our methodology and our proposal, but we see that as being one of our steps coming very soon. And I have a concern that if you allow an hourly claim with the leftovers, as we'll say, that you're essentially you're ruining the incentives and the signal that we want to be sent in the market that will get at our need to to capture kind of the carbon aspects. So that's something that really gets lost in annual claims. And if you allow the leftovers to just be rolled into an annual claim, then yeah, that market signal gets lost.
Yeah, and I think there's one thing that I don't necessarily subscribe to this, and this is where Rosie and I have disagreed, is that there's this belief that a REC, because it can't be separated by hours currently, if it's not broken up into hours, it represents the whole generation profile over the whole month. And so if you break off a certain piece of that, you're really, you're taking away the justification for that understanding. And so you can't operate across markets. And I think it's a place of reasonable disagreement, but it's important to have consensus. Otherwise countries will be having claims across borders that don't reconcile.
Yeah,
go ahead, Katrine.
Yeah, I tend to think also that it depends on from which angle you look at the question. Why not annual cancellation or retirement? Because many in Europe also would say that suffices, the current system works. At least that is very true with a limited amount of renewables in the market. When renewables become substantial, you see this is changing, and you see this the interests at the issuing body side mainly changing at the TSO level, who are most involved in the balancing concept, of course, and so probably that is the main trigger for it. You also have in Europe some countries with at least with monthly matching. France has now put that in its legislation, and further there is also the debate regarding to system integration of the multiple energy carriers, particularly while hydrogen is being stimulated. There pops up the question, the case for stimulating it should somehow complement the existing system, not absorb the assets of the existing system. And there in European draft legislation, there is a temporal link between the consumed electricity for hydrogen production that is being explored. So it's rather probably the balancing reasoning while renewables are increasing, but you'll see it will take time and depending on the angle from which it's being looked at.
Yeah, very quick answer from me. Thank you, Katrine. I just think firstly, there's nothing wrong with the making annual claims in terms of an accounting mechanism, and it's much better to be buying some renewable energy on an annual basis than not buying any at all. So it is a valid system, and it certainly has been valid, you know, when the system was first introduced, when there were very few renewables on the grid and grid balancing wasn't an issue. It, you know, probably didn't make sense to go straight to hourly certificates. Now that we have very cheap renewable energy, and we have overproduction of renewable energy at certain times, there's a mispricing. Basically, that's the simplest explanation, right? And on an annual basis, what essentially that means is you're pricing the renewable energy the same regardless of its availability. Renewable energy should be cheap when there's lots of it available, and expensive when it's in short supply. And on an annual basis, you don't have that. On an hourly basis, you do have that system. And that by correcting the mispricing, you actually create a price signal for other technologies, not just renewable energy, but energy storage and demand response, which are the things that are going to be needed if we want to get to a completely carbon-free grid. So that's why I think you're seeing companies already like Google and Microsoft come out and make set targets around achieving carbon-free energy on a 24/7 basis. We're running out of time. We've got lots of questions.
Yeah, I was wondering, can we get one more question? Let's get one more question in. We had a few questions on the energy losses, and do you have a feeling on that? I can just answer briefly. For M-RETS, we just track generation and consumption, so there's not, at least in my mind, I'm pretty sure the rest of the US registries that's how they work. It's just too hard to track line losses. But I'm not sure if the AIB or Energy Tag has a position.
Similar in Europe. Usually there is issuance of GEOs, and then consumers at their point of consumption cancel GEOs, or suppliers cancel GEOs for their consumers. But quite some grid operators also feel this to be their responsibility to green their losses. They buy guarantees of origin for doing so and cancel them.
And Toby?
Yeah, not much more to add. We agree. We don't have a set position yet. It's very much a topic for the working groups.
And I saw Maria pop on. Would you give everyone one last? We still have 100 people on. Would you mind if we give everyone one last 30 seconds to just?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. All right. Katrine, do you have any kind of concluding thoughts? And then Toby, and then Rosie.
I think for the European systems, it's really good to explore the demand for the granular certificates, and it will need clear proof of the case for integrating them in the law. That has become clear. But the demonstrator projects are a fantastic case for moving in that direction.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining. We have been amazed by the level of response to this initiative, and I also want to say a huge thank you to Ben and Rosie for kind of coming up with the idea for this webinar, and for their great proposal, and really interested to see the results of their demonstrator and also some of the other demonstrator projects which are ongoing. So yeah, thank you.
My final thoughts are just to thank everyone and encourage anyone who's interested in really engaging in some of these details to reach out to us, and we're happy to set up individual conversations where we can really nerd out, because these details are important. Thanks.
Great. Thank you everyone.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, have a great day. Thank you, Maria and EIT, for putting this on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm so sorry. I forgot to thank you very much.
No, thank you so much.
All. Thanks, Maria. Thanks, Robert. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
And I've downloaded all the questions so I can send them around
Great.
to the presenters.
I'm really sorry, Maria. I should have thanked you guys at the beginning as well.
No worries. No worries.
No,
you have thanked me so many times. It's fine.
Yeah, and thank you, Maria, for all the work that went into this.
Thank you.
Yeah, Maria, seriously.
No worries. I didn't do anything.
No, great job.